Hello, and thank you for listening to the Conscious Diva podcast. I'm Tatiana, and in this episode, science and history writer Andrew Collins joins me in a thought-provoking exploration into esoteric lore and the ancient origins of civilization. Andrew is the author of over 15 books that challenge the way we think about the past. And in his latest book, Karahan Tepe, Civilization of the Anunnaki and the Cosmic Origins of the Serpent of Eden, he reveals why this Turkish site, built more than 11,000 years ago, is considered the most important archaeological discovery of the 21st century. Andrew's book presents the first in-depth investigation of the carvings and constructions at Karahan Tepe. In this episode, we discuss the Cygnus constellation and how Karahan Tepe was used by shamans, and we also touch on how this might relate to Vedic astrology. I hope you enjoyed this thought-provoking episode. Please let me know, leave a review, or send me a message on Instagram at The Conscious Diva. Everything you need to know about this episode can be found on theconsciousdiva.com on the show page notes, episode number 73. Thank you so much for listening. So thank you so much for being here today, Andrew. It's so great to meet you and to talk about your new book.
Okay.
Gosh, there was so much in this book and a lot that I totally could relate to and really loved. And because it's so chunky, so full of stuff, I just thought let's start with a little bit of some backstory for listeners that may not be familiar with your work. And I think just sort of giving some context to the Cygnus Key. What is this before we get into Karahan Tepe? Because I think people need to know what that is.
Well, my own interest in the subject probably began in the mid 1990s when I wrote a book called From the Ashes of Angels that was published in 1996. And basically, this looked at the different legends and myths relating to beings that were said to have given humanity the rudiments of civilization. In Hebrew myth, they're called the Watchers and the Nephilim. In Sumerian myth, they're called the Anunnaki, or the Anuna. That's their correct original Sumerian name. They're also present in the myths of Armenia, of Iran, and of course, obviously, various of the other different civilizations, cultures, populations that existed in the Near East. And basically, what became clear is that these weren't ethereal beings. They were flesh and blood human beings who had existed, I predicted, around the end of the last ice age and had come into southeastern and eastern Anatolia and kick-started civilization. And so this region was itself the cradle of civilization. It was also known in Hebrew myth as the Garden of Eden because it was from here that the four rivers of paradise took their rise, all four of them. And therefore, the stories of Adam and Eve, all of the early stories that you find in the book of Genesis, like, the fact that there were supposedly giants in the earth in those days, and they came upon the mortal women and they bore giants or Nephilim. All these stories seem to relate to some kind of foundation of civilization. And this is essentially what I wrote in that book. And as I was writing this book, what I didn't realize is that the first spades were going into the ground at a place called Göbekli Tepe, which is just outside of the ancient city of Şanlıurfa, which was known in the Bible as Edessa. And of course, when details of Göbekli Tepe was finally released to the world in the year 2000, in a huge article that appeared in a German magazine, Color magazine. I mean, it was like, well, here is the motherlode. This is quite clearly what you were talking about. And, this shamanic elite, this priestly elite that you said were bird shamans, possibly wore cloaks of feathers. One of their main symbols was the snake. This is them. This was the founders of this civilization, which we now know under the name Taş Tepeler. This is what the Ministry of Culture and Tourism in Turkey wants to push this name, and it means stony hills. The stone relates to the fact that this high culture, nay, civilization, used stone to create its stone structures like the T pillars that you see. but also the hills are tepes. Tepes are these artificial occupational mounds that are created, that are built up through all this human activity over across a period of maybe 1500 years. And, it's obviously within these that we're finding these stone enclosures today. And I mean, there are hundreds of these tepes all over the landscape of Southeast. So they just rise out of nowhere and they are completely human made. So this is essentially what I was obviously predicting would be found in the cradle of civilization. And now we have that. And we now know that it's 12,000 years old, that it survived through until about 10,000 years ago when it abruptly ends. But the consequences of that was the rise of the Neolithic civilization or Neolithic expanse, going out into different directions. And of course, ending up in places like, Western Europe, Britain, and the creation of places like Stonehenge. So, this is essentially what we're looking at here.
Okay, so I'm going to just have you backtrack a little bit because there's so much in your book that relates to the cosmos, different myth stories, and they all interrelate to one another. So just going back to the Cygnus Key, what was this sort of astronomical discovery or connection you made with human consciousness or the awakening of human consciousness? Because it's significant to all these other things that we're going to talk about.
As far as human consciousness is concerned, it's ideas of ontology, which is, who we are, where we came from, what's it all about, and what happens, after death, through to what we call cosmogony, which is the idea of an evolution of existence from something to what we have here today, the physical universe, the world around us, the stars above us, etc., etc. And this is something that seems to emerge from all of the carvings, the alignments that we see at the different enclosures at Göbekli Tepe and also at Karahan Tepe, which is the sister site of Göbekli Tepe, which is obviously what my new book is all about, basically. I mean, I already wrote a book called Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods, that came out in 2014. You allude there to the Cygnus Key. That was a book that came out in 2018. And obviously now we've been focusing our attention not just on Karahan, but we're evolving and updating our own views of what these people, these Tash Tepe culture, were really into, because we know so much more now because we have an extra huge, great complex to look at in Karahan Tepe. But as far as their interest in the skies are concerned, what I found from a very early point is that the enclosures are very clearly aligned towards the north, even though some of my colleagues want to see it in the equal and opposite direction. They are aligned to the north because basically, once you're inside them, you face towards what's known as a porthole stone, which is like a flat stone that faces towards you. All the other T-shaped pillars are facing towards you like spokes of a wheel, but often there is a what we call a porthole stone, and it has a hole in it that's just about the size of a human head. And this is always generally in the north-northwest, certainly within all of the structures at Göbekli Tepe. And basically, what it points towards is the star Deneb in the constellation of Cygnus, as it's set during the time frame of construction of these enclosures. Now, this is really, really important because not only does it give us a foundation date for these monuments, because obviously stars move based upon the process of precession over a period of 26,000 years. So they slightly change their position, that they rise on the north-northeastern horizon, let's say, and then set on the north-northwestern horizon. And it certainly seemed as if they were targeting Deneb for some reason. Now, Deneb is seen as a star associated with a point of entry into the sky world in many different cultures around the world. And obviously the stars of Cygnus around it, with it, of course. I mean, in Native American tradition, for instance, you have the Path of Souls death journey, where at the point of death, and I don't necessarily just mean for people that die, I mean shamans as well, going into a death trance, they would make a leap of faith into the sky towards a particular star, well, actually a nebula in the constellation of Orion, which was the step-off point into the sky world. And what you would then do is then go around the Milky Way on this journey, on this path that would take you eventually to Deneb, which is where the Milky Way splits into two separate streams. And in the middle of it, going down the center, is what's known as the Dark Rift. And this Dark Rift, or certainly the beginning of it in the area of Deneb, was seen as an ultimate point of entry, or I should say exit, of this particular universe into the sky world. You find it, for instance, in Mayan tradition. There are temples, for instance, at Palenque that are aligned specifically to Deneb, and the imagery in them relating to the cosmic tree quite clearly suggests that that is the Milky Way, and that the journey is going through or into the cosmic tree and entering into the sky world. Well, it would seem the same thing was also going on at Tash Tepe sites like Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, so that they had like this death journey that was based on a very ancient cosmogony, whereby they believed, not only that there was the stars, the universe, the world, but there was something beyond that. It's something which in ancient Akkadian is referred to as the cosmic ocean, the place from which all life and existence emerges from, often seen as like a sort of primeval void
Yeah.
or a primeval waters. I mean, it's there, for instance, in ancient Egyptian myth, for
Many,
instance.
many cultures. I mean, you have it in the Australian Aboriginals, you have the rainbow serpent where they cross over. You've also got it in my teacher's tradition, in the Khas Nepali tradition, with the Nagas and the churning of
Yeah,
the ocean of milk,
exactly.
and Sari Mai, who's seen as the this cosmic mother, who actually has a white snake that represents fertility and abundance.
Yeah,
And then there's so many myth
yeah.
stories that actually relate to the story. So is this why now Karahan Tepe is being considered one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the 21st century, with these amazing, like incredible connections that we can now make and pinpoint as they reflect? And you talk about your colleague in the book who actually just serendipitously happened to gain access and go in and align with the sun on that particular day in December.
I mean, that's the work of my good friends Hugh Newman and J.J. Ainsworth. Basically, Karahan Tepe was unexcavated for many years. I mean, I first visited it in 2004 and continued to go there through until excavations began in 2019 under the leadership of Necmi Karol of the University of Istanbul. And since that time, 2019, they've done an incredible job in uncovering a whole huge area, which has revealed, almost like a sort of lost city, really. What's so different about Karahan is that the structures, or certainly three major ones, are cut out of the bedrock, either entirely or in part. And because of this, they constitute the oldest rock architecture anywhere in the world. This is rock architecture that dates back at least 11 to 11,500 years ago. Here at Karahan, it's much, much older. And something else is going on at Karahan. It's far more interesting than Göbekli Tepe, in my opinion. Göbekli Tepe is almost like a cathedral, where you might have your high altar, then you have, a whole load of smaller enclosures, but that are all of the same style, but seem to have slightly different functions. And it's the same, obviously, as a cathedral. Obviously, you have lots of different chapels and shrines in a cathedral dedicated to, different saints or divinities. And so to me, Göbekli Tepe is like almost like a pilgrimage center. People would come there from probably all over Anatolia, probably from the Levant as well. And they would arrive there. They'd probably be allotted a particular, room that's got tiny T-pillars in it, and they'd be able to do whatever they wanted there, rituals, dream incubation, maybe healing ceremonies or something like this, or empowerment ceremonies. And obviously there would be the larger communal enclosures where bigger things would have gone on. And that's that. But at Karahan, it's clear to everybody that goes there that whatever they were up to there is much deeper. They were going deep, basically, and possibly even darker. And what I mean by that is into the night sky. And I say that because the main symbol that crops up again and again at Karahan Tepe is the snake. It's carved on T-shaped pillars. It's incised in huge carved curves on the bedrock floor. It's incised onto the side of benches. It's there all over the place. Plus, one of the most important of the structures there, structure AB, which we call the Pillars Shrine, is basically been dropped down into the bedrock, and 10 pillars have been left standing in place, as they cut down into the bedrock to create this trapezoidal shrine that's about, I think it's about 7 or 8 meters in length. And out of the wall that faces into the hill of Karahan is this huge human head, 3 times the size of a normal human head. And it's on the long serpentine neck, and it's mesmerizing to look at this.
I
And
mean,
and,
let's
and
go
all
to
of
your
this has
book
been
and
done.
let's just look because
Yeah,
you've
there you go, there
yeah.
you go. You've got it there.
Mhm.
That's what we call the Pillars Shrine. And you look at this and you realize that something incredibly unique must have been going on here. So what is this snake? Well, before we go on any further, that Pillars Shrine, what I realized is that it itself is the representation of the head of a snake. Because if you look down on it, not only does it look like, the head of a snake, but you can actually overlay the head of the Anatolian meadow viper, which we now know was being used or utilized in rituals at Karahan. And they're an exact match. I show this
Yeah, you
in the
showed in
book.
the book. And the
Yeah.
illustration that you did as well is it's right on. I mean, the way you've
Yeah.
overlaid it and
Yeah,
shown that.
and the neck and the back is
Yeah.
actually a raised area curving behind the actual shrine. So it's very, very clear. And once you realize this, it becomes difficult to unconnect
Yeah.
the shrine, with a snake's head. So the question becomes, what are you doing? Why would you want to go into a snake's head? Which, by the way, you could only have done, because we think we had a roof on it, you could only have done by going through a small porthole between this big elliptical enclosure next to it, which we call the Great Ellipse, structure AD, and a tiny little window like hole that you would have to quite literally crawl through
Yeah, shimmy
and
through.
go through the other side, almost like a snake.
Mhm.
So you'd almost had to become a snake. In other words, rituals, I think, were taking place where the person was adopting the guise of a snake. Now, this happens even in this modern day in rituals in places like Thailand, in Haiti, where they evoke deities in the form of snakes that are said to possess the individuals. And the individuals will quite literally go down onto the ground and crawl along like a snake. And I think something similar was going on at Karahan Tepe, that people were being possessed by some kind of snake genius. And we'll come on to
Yeah.
what that was in a minute.
Mhm.
And then going into the head of the snake, which basically means you're entering into its mouth. Why would you do that? I think the answer is to be consumed by that snake, to be eaten by it, quite literally, to become a part of its DNA.
Yeah.
Why would you do that? To connect with a a snake genus, which I believe they looked towards the sky for its identity. And we know this because at least three of the enclosures at Karahan Tepe seem to be aligned towards a particular area of the sky. And this is the galactic bulge.
Yeah.
This marks not only the center of our own Milky Way galaxy, but in the past it would have been much bigger, like a big light bulb in the sky. And various ancient cultures saw the Milky Way as a snake. The
Mhm.
whole thing is a snake, or
Yes.
what they call the world encircling snake.
Hmm.
And the head of it would have been the galactic bulge, where even to this day, in certain cultures in America, in the Americas, it's still seen as the head of a snake.
It's a cosmic
And
serpent,
it
essentially.
was the cosmic serpent,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that
And
what
it
they were
does
doing,
look like that. It actually does, and as you said today, because of electricity and all the cities with all the bright
Yeah,
lights, it's much more difficult to notice this. So you almost have to look at or old images or be somewhere way out in the
yeah.
desert. But you can see how the way that it's formed and how long it is. And to your point, again, with so many cultures, their ancient cultures, this was also recognized as this pathway to the other world. I believe that it's the pathway that energetically, when we leave our human form, we leave and go back. That is the way back
Absolutely.
to source, and it's the way
Yeah,
that we travel into this realm or this lifetime
yeah.
back into incarnating, if you will. So just explain, go, and I'm sure you were about to do this anyway, the galactic bulge and how it relates to the constellation of Scorpio, essentially, or
Yeah.
Scorpius.
In the early Neolithic, the soul was represented by the head or the skull. This is the reason why the skulls or human heads would be decapitated and removed from bodies. And the body's allowed to be picked clean by vultures. You see
Mhm.
the symbolism at places like Göbekli Tepe, headless
Well, it
individuals.
still happens today in
Yeah,
Nepal, Tibet, on the mountaintop, and
absolutely.
even
Well,
India.
it's what we call sky burials.
Yeah.
But ancient, the people at, let's say, the Tash Temple people at Karahan and Göbekli would seem to have done this. I mean, Professor Klaus Schmidt, who was the discoverer of Göbekli Tepe back in 1994, he believed that the sky burials had taken place there. And the vulture was the key symbol associated with this. But anyway, what would happen is that the body would be consumed by the vultures, and the vultures would then fly off.
Mhm.
And these people came to believe that the vultures would take away some part of the soul when they flew off, which is why the vulture then became a soul bird, basically, the bird that would carry the soul from this world into the next. Clearly, in other parts of the world, it's a different bird because vultures don't play the same role. I mean, for instance, from let's say Siberia across to Western Europe, the main soul bird is a swan or a goose, migrational birds that were seen to fly away to the north and then come back again. Whereas obviously in the Near East, it was the vulture that played this role. And the vulture therefore became not just a symbol of the soul bird, but which is known in ancient Greek as the psychopomp, the soul
Mhm.
carrier or the soul accompanier. But it also became associated with the sky itself. And the stars of Cygnus became the bird, the vulture, the celestial, the sky figure in the form of a vulture. And various different cultures, not just in Sumerian and Akkad, but also in Greece and also in neighboring Armenia, the vulture was associated with the constellation of Cygnus. And even to this day, in Armenian sky lore, Cygnus is called Anja, which means the angel, and its form is a vulture, which I find very interesting. It's also an angel,
Mhm.
because obviously my book from the Ashes of Angels said that angels were in fact human figures that wore the cloaks of vulture. But so the head of the Milky Way serpent, it's the head that they would have been interested in because that's where they would have seen the soul of the spirit of the Milky Way serpent. So really, in many ways, it was only that they were interested in because that was the point of communication with this particular cosmic serpent, this cosmic entity. So they would be focusing and aligning their monuments towards this area of the sky. And the main stars associated with that spot is the stars of Scorpius, which although we obviously normally associate with a scorpion, in many cultures, including in Native American tradition, the stars of Scorpius were a snake. And we know that that was certainly the case in Hebrew mythology as well, that it was a snake. And I think what that represented was the active spirit coming from the mouth of the cosmic serpent, almost like its tongue became the active spirit. So the stars of Scorpius became incredibly important. But next to them is another really important constellation called Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus means the snake bearer or the snake handler. And it's shown with a big snake, in its hands, which is called Serpents, which is made up of obviously the whole long line of stars. Now, I think that this is a representation of a snake shaman or shamaness in the sky that is almost a reflection of what was going on within the enclosures at Karahan Tepe. They were quite literally trying to become at one with this cosmic serpent so that it would possess them quite literally, and they could then convey that information to the community
Yeah.
through attendance, presumably. And there's
It's
an image in the book.
it's the transference of cosmic wisdom coming
Yeah,
from.
and we have a perfect example of this in the Delphic Oracle in Greece. This was exactly the same thing. What you had here, according to the myth, was a shrine that was beneath a temple of Apollo, and the priestess, known as the Pythia, would sit on a tripod seat, and the fumes of a dead serpent would rise up, that serpent having been killed by Apollo, according to the story, and intoxicate them, in other words, send them into an altered state. And then Apollo would possess them, and they would make their proclamations, and these could decide the destinies of kings, of countries, even of the gods themselves. And here's the interesting thing. You think of Apollo, he's the sky god, the sun god, or whatever. No, the form that Apollo would appear was as a snake. And you can see this in images of the Delphic oracle, the woman herself, sitting there with the snakes all around her. It's quite clear that that's the form. And if you look into it, the snake is one of the main ways that Apollo would appear to people. And what I think
Yeah,
is
I didn't
going
know
on
that
here,
until I read your book. I didn't realize that
yeah,
about Apollo,
yeah.
and
I mean,
also didn't.
what I think is going on here is that the cult of Apollo took over much earlier cults
Mm,
in places like Greece, and somewhere like the Delphic Oracle itself was originally probably a female-led shrine dedicated to some kind of cosmic serpent or a being in the form of a serpent, probably a woman. And what comes along is the followers of Apollo. They take over the shrine, and they then say, no, the entity that's going to come through and communicate with you is Apollo and not whatever you thought it was beforehand. Do you know what I mean?
mhm.
And they make up the story that the serpent's been slain and is now beneath the earth, and its fumes are coming up and intoxicating you. Clearly, this is a memory of some much older, probably a female-led cult at the site. And again, I talk about this, and I talk about the fact that this is accepted, that it probably does go back to the Neolithic age, and that the people there were probably what's known as Pelasgians, which were the pre-Hellenic peoples of Greece that had their own language, which was Lurian, or Luwian as it's pronounced. And Lurian, I find, is very interesting because my colleague Robert Schoch and some other friends of mine have identified some of the symbols at Göbekli Tepe as looking very much like what's known as Luwian script.
Mm.
And I do think that that's very, very important. I do think that that's something that needs to be looked at more clearly. But what was going on at Delphi, I think, was going on at Karahan Tepe, but in a much cruder, more rawer form.
And so you touched on constellations really quickly, but in your book,
Yeah,
you mention this potentially we're missing a 13th zodiac sign,
yeah.
uh, which could have been a snake.
Um,
What do you
well,
think?
well, I mean, it's Ophiuchus, the snake bearer or the snake charmer, and he comes from Akkadian and Babylonian myth, where he's also shown in a similar manner. So yes, it is a serpent. I think it is this active spirit of the Milky Way serpent, and quite clearly the fact that you have a human there, is an expression of the sort of as above, so below.
Mhm.
The shaman is attempting to, not just communicate, but to become at one with, possibly even wrestle with in some way, which is what Ophiuchus represents. And yes, it is the 13th sign of the zodiac. And for those that don't understand what that really means, the sky was divided into 12 equal parts. When I say the sky, the ecliptic, the path of the sun, a long time ago, possibly by the Babylonians, almost certainly by those that gave them then their astronomical knowledge, who was the Chaldeans. They're the people of southeastern Turkey, by the way. And they divided it equally into 12 parts, which means that as a circle, it's divided up into 30 degrees. And for each of those 30 degrees, a sign was allotted, as the sun passes through it. But that's not what the sun actually does. Yes, it passes through those 12, but unevenly, it doesn't pass through everyone in a 30-degree arc. Some of them are much longer, some of them are much shorter. But it also passes through a 13th sign that is located between Scorpius and Sagittarius, and that's Ophiuchus. And in fact, as the sun passes through Scorpius, it spends less time in Scorpius than it does in Ophiuchus. And it's as it passes through Ophiuchus that it's coming up towards galactic center, the very center point of our galaxy, which is obviously marked around it by the galactic bulge. And just as the sun transfers from Ophiuchus into Sagittarius, it comes to the closest point to galactic center. This is certainly something to be aware of. And to this day, it does it around the winter solstice. We will all remember 2012 and the end of the Mayan calendar, the end of the Bactrian cycle. It was said, obviously, that on the 21st of December 2012, the sun would align perfectly with galactic center, and this would raise our consciousness and whatever. Now, the problem with that was that, yeah, it was true, but it didn't just happen in one day. This is a process that has been going on for decades already and will continue to do so for, several more decades. So in other words, that synchronization between galactic center and the winter solstice is something that will continue to happen. And as I said, it occurs just after the sun leaves Ophiuchus and enters into Sagittarius, the first day of Sagittarius, which, as far as this particular zodiacal cycle is concerned, is roughly about the 18th of December right now. But anyway, well, I mean, the 13th sign is very important, I think,
I
because
think it's really important, especially considering it's been omitted. And I just wanted to bring up something also in Vedic astrology. They have Rahu and Ketu, which are
that's right.
north and south nodes, and
That's
they
right.
represent the serpent, the head and the tail, and also
Yep.
Ouroboros.
Yep.
And interestingly, I think Ketu is associated with the sign. It co-rules the sign of Scorpio.
Right.
So it's kind of it's interesting that we have, again, in another culture, the serpent witnessed in the sky. These are called
Yeah.
grahas. They're considered shadow
Yeah.
planets in Vedic
Yeah.
astrology,
Yeah.
but they're very active and they show up in, if
Absolutely.
any Westerners had their charts done in Vedic astrology,
Yeah.
you for sure be familiar with that.
And absolutely. And I mean, I talk about this in one of my books. I can't remember which one it is. It may be the Cygnus Key. Maybe I can't remember. I write so many, I lose track. But anyway, here's the important thing. The Milky Way was seen as a serpent in the past, no question about that at all. However, so was the ecliptic itself, the actual path of the sun. And I think that they probably began by being connected with the Milky Way and it gradually shifted to the ecliptic itself. And that becomes the symbol both of the Ouroboros, which clearly is the Milky Way serpent, or this cosmic serpent, in a cyclic fashion. But on top of that, it was also seen as two snakes or two serpents or two dragons, which, as you say, Rahu and Ketu in Vedic astrology. But also, it's something that you find in, let's say, alchemy, where you see, two dragons, one biting the tail of the other. This symbolism is also associated with the ecliptic. And the two places where the heads and tails would come together were indeed the points on the ecliptic where it crossed the Milky Way, where it does in two places in the sky. One is the area of Sagittarius and Scorpio, which obviously also includes, as we've just talked about, Ophiuchus. And on the other side of the sky, in the equal and opposite direction, it is the area of Gemini and Taurus. And these combinations of Gemini and Taurus and Sagittarius and Scorpius come up again and again in these, the dual heads of this cosmic serpent. And again, I go into this in the book. It's something that almost certainly was there in Babylonian astrology and astronomy. And it's the same thing ultimately, but there is a cyclic action going on here. You're dealing with obviously the course of the sun over the year along its path of the ecliptic, but then it's linking to much longer cycles, whether they be lunar cycles, whether they be associated with cycles that are more cosmic in nature. I mean, I have a whole chapter in the book that basically is a sideline in a way, but talks about the fact that the solar system itself has its own cyclic course around galactic center. And we can talk about galactic center as a set. I think that's very, very important in all of this. And it takes us 224 million years, and that's a long time, to actually go all the way round and come back to the same spot. That's the time that's been calculated. There's a few other variations in this calculation, but one of the main amounts is given as 224 million. Now, what's so interesting is that recently an extinction cycles have been noted within the fossil record, within seabed levels and changes, earth changes of 32 million years. And this involves large amounts of life that have evolved, dying at the end of this cycle, and then obviously new ones emerging after that, and then dying again after 32. So anyway, it's 32 million years. And this is proper geoscientists have come out. There's a whole book about this. I talk all about it in the book, in my book. Now, here's some simple facts here. If you divide 32 million into 224, it's exactly 7. So in other words, these cycles that the Earth are on seem to be reflective of the actual movement of our solar system around galactic center itself. And I put this in, but the scientists themselves are hinting at exactly the same thing. And then you can look at other cycles that the Earth and the sun have, such as the so-called Milankovitch cycle, which determines when ice ages take place, or that's what's thought. And a Milankovitch cycle relates to not just the position of the sun, the Earth as it revolves around the sun, but that reverse, it gets narrower and wider as it does so across a cycle of 112,000 years. Now, 112,000 years can be perfectly divided into 224 million. It's a perfect fractalization of it. And you can continue to do this with other cosmic cycles, right the way down into Venus cycles and things like that. This is science. This is nothing to do with astrology.
Yeah.
This is pure geoscience. And the importance here is that, yes, of course, as you say, within certain other traditions, like the Vedic tradition, and also obviously reflective in Chinese tradition, even in Norse or in Sumerian tradition, you have these cycles of time that can be broken down into very important cosmic numbers like 108, 54, 432, etc., etc., which, as I show in my book, The Cygnus Key, are all reflective of the combination of eclipse cycles in association with the precessional cycle of the sun itself. Of our relationship, on the wobble of the 26,000 year precessional cycle. So, in other words, that which makes the rising of the sun shift against the background of stars in reflection of the ecliptic, which gives us the 12 ages, the 12 ages of which we're about to enter the age of Aquarius, and going back let's say to 10,500 BC, we were in the age of Leo, the equal and opposite. And this is the other important thing, is that there is a key solar alignment at Karahan Tepe, which is aligned towards midsummer sunset. In other words, this particular shrine, which itself, by the way, I say is also probably modelled on the shape of a snake's head, we call it the pit shrine because it's got this huge, great pit in the middle of it. It's aligned to sun at the, as it sets at the time of the summer solstice. But if you continue looking at exactly the same spot where the sun has just set, just 2 hours later, as it gets dark, the Milky Way is directly at that spot, rising vertically up with the galactic bulge right at the base of it. And this, I don't think, is a coincidence. And what you see here really is an exact reflection of what we have now with the sun crossing the galactic bulge at the time of midwinter in the morning. One cycle ago, half cycle ago, not full cycle, half cycle ago, it was doing exactly the same thing, but equal and opposite at the summer solstice, at the sun setting at the summer solstice.
What was
So in
it
other words,
revealing in the pit shrine?
we're almost one half cycle exactly away from whatever these people were experiencing at Karahan Tepe. So I find it so interesting that, let's look at the Maya, for instance.
Well, just quickly, in
And
the pit shrine, when the sun was all aligned, what was
yeah,
it, December 20th or 21st?
no, that was, as I say, summer solstice.
That was
So,
the summer solstice,
I
not
mean,
the
the
winter.
equivalent
Okay.
of our June the
Because
21st.
you also went back and you experienced that as well. It wasn't just Hugh, it wasn't just your colleagues. It was you
Well,
actually
no, I
went.
mean, basically, I discovered this alignment, which arguably is the oldest in the world, of a structure orientated towards the solstice, because it dates to probably about 9 to 9,400 BC. So, it tops all of them, basically, even the ones that I'd previously found at Göbekli Tepe. However, based on this, my colleagues Hugh Newman and JJ Ainsworth went out to Karahan Tepe in December 2021, and they happened to be there. Well, they knew it was going to be the solstice, and they hoped that they might see something of interest if they were there at the time of the solstice. Well, due to circumstances, they were forced to have to go there at sunrise on the 20th of December 2021. And they got there just as the sun was rising. So they started taking photographs and videos and whatever else. And JJ happened to notice that the sun was coming in through the porthole stone from the great ellipse. It had ridden just enough for it to come through that and hit this giant stone head on the western wall. And it was only illuminating that. So she obviously called Hugh, and they came down and they took photographs of it and time lapse and whatever. And
And
this was
not to
another
make a joke of it,
discovery.
but it reminded me of that scene in Indiana in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh, I
Egypt,
see.
when the
Yeah, I
sun
like that.
comes and hits the
Yeah,
star,
yeah, yeah.
illuminating
Well,
one
that's
point.
exactly the sort of thing we're talking about.
Yeah.
And now there's been a lot of controversy about this. I mean, some people say, oh, it's just coincidence, or that if there was a roof, this couldn't possibly have happened. But all of this has been researched, very thoroughly by Hugh. And even if it had a roof, the roof would have had, windows, and it would have allowed the sun to penetrate right the way through the great ellipse, through the porthole stone, and hit that head, which, as I said, that shrine I think had a roof in itself. So it would have just literally illuminated the whole place via the head,
It would have
and
been a
only the
very
head.
sacred experience for them to
Yeah.
have
And,
witnessed,
and also
actually.
what we discovered is that going back to 9,000 BC, because the level of the sun would have been slightly lower than it is today, the angle would have made it even better. So it would have illuminated even more of the head. So this is a remarkable discovery, and one that's very similar, of course, to places like Newgrange in Ireland, where you have these Neolithic passage graves that also have, both solar and lunar alignments, particularly Newgrange itself, where just after dawn on the winter solstice, the sunlight will come through a light box, through a long, narrow, chamber,
Yeah.
for a distance of about, I think it's something like 60 to 70 feet, and then illuminate particular symbols within a central chamber. This is very, very similar, but what we've got going on at Karahan is at least 6,000 years older than Newgrange. And of course, there are many, many other sites around the world that have similar alignments, everything from Stonehenge to Chaco Canyon, the daggers on the wall illuminating the spirals at Chaco Canyon. This is something that Hugh and JJ have done in a appendix for this book. This whole story of theirs is given in full detail with their research. I also include it, within the main body of the text as well.
Mm-hmm. So thank you for explaining all of that. And we're gonna talk about now the Adam and Eve story.
Okay, cool.
Well, I
Yeah,
think it's really important because there's so much myth here, and there's one story that
yeah, yeah.
the mainstream story that's been told forever. And in are you familiar with this book, Dragons and Serpents, Earth Mysteries and the Time of Change by Stefan Brunel?
No, I'm not
Okay, so he's a German
It looks
author.
interesting. Yeah,
This was actually translated
yeah,
into English, but he talks about a similar, with Adam and Eve and how the serpent was actually a positive being, and the
yeah,
serpent was demonized in this story. So I just
yeah,
wanted, I'd love for you to talk about your discoveries with the serpent and Adam and
yeah.
Eve, this connection to all the other things we've spoken about.
Okay. Well, firstly, we previously mentioned that the area of southeastern and eastern Turkey was the original Garden of Eden. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. It's the place where the four rivers of paradise rise. They are the Euphrates, the Tigris, the Arxes, which flows east into the Caspian Sea, and also the fourth one is the Great Azab River, been recognised as such by the Syrian church since the early years of Christianity. And they all rise, as I said, in southeastern to eastern Turkey. So we're in the right area, okay? And I mean, this is what the Hebrew myths and legends tell us about where Eden, which was also called heaven, by the way, or paradise, was actually located. And so we're in the right area. We also know that the early stories of the Book of Genesis were all played out in this same region, right up to and including those of Abraham, because Abraham was said to have been born at Shanlerfa, which was Edessa in the Bible.
Hmm.
Um, and basically, what happened was that at a certain point, God appears to him and says, you're going to go to the promised land that's promised to to you and your descendants. Off you go. He then goes to a place called Haran, which is about 45 minutes drive from Shanlerfa towards Syria, towards the Syrian border, where his father lived. He tarried there for a while, and then finally he then goes down into the promised land, which of course is which becomes Israel, and he stops at a place called Shechem, where he builds the first altar of God. There's a big mountain there called Gerizim, which becomes the mountain of God. Anyway, that's the story in the book of Genesis. So let's go back to Adam and Eve. There are locations in southeast Turkey that claim to be Eden, but one of the most interesting is Şanlıurfa itself, because the most ancient name of Şanlıurfa was Adama, which means the place of Adam.
Mhm.
And according to the story, God created the soul of Adam. And by the way, another ancient name of Şanlıurfa is Ruha or El Ruha, which means the soul. And that soul is Adam, and that it was placed down in Şanlıurfa somewhere. And they used the red earth there, which is there, to create Adam. And
Mhm.
obviously, he's there and this is the terrestrial garden. Obviously, they then supposedly create Eve from the rib, according to the story. And they're there. And then the serpent comes along, which remember at this time has got arms and legs. This is an important point. And the serpent tells them, speaks to them, and tells them that they're naked, they lose their innocence. God turns around, realizes this, and says, "Who the hell told you that? Oh, that serpent over there." And so, he takes away the legs of the serpent, the arms and the legs, says you must forever crawl, and chucks out Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, lest they eat of the tree of life, which is the other tree
Yeah.
there. Sorry, obviously they eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that the supposed fruit, which I
Fruit.
can show actually was not a fruit at all. It's a seed of wheat. The earliest traditions and are that was no rosy red apple or a pomegranate. The word that's actually used means seed and can mean a seed of wheat. And in some legends, it is still that the fruit is still a stalk of wheat.
Yeah, so it's interesting because in Stefan Bronel's book, when he's describing this
Yeah,
story, he says the serpent comes and tells Eve, you should eat the seeds because they're going to give you wisdom and knowledge, and they'd have no idea what that means. And
yeah.
she eats it and then has this epiphany, shares it with Adam. He then has an
Yeah.
epiphany. They become self-realized, and in doing so,
That's what it's about. Yeah,
notice that they are both naked and
yeah,
suddenly have this wisdom about that, as opposed to sort of being just walking around blind, not knowing what really, they're just there. They've just been positioned there.
yeah.
So
Well,
that's what he talks about.
what happens is that they supposedly go east onto the Haran Plain, according to the legend that's there to this day and still told by local people in Shanlurfa. And there they start tilling the land.
Mm-hmm.
And according to the story, Adam turns to Eve and says, "What are we going to grow?" And she says, "Oh, how about this that I just happen to have in my hand that I brought out of the terrestrial paradise? And it's a stalk of wheat." So he says, "Yeah, that's a great idea." So they plant this wheat, and for the first few years, they have a very low yield because it's very hard work. They can't do much. And then a bull comes along, according to the story, and they use the bull for ploughing. They can plant a wider area, etc., and the yield, gets increases. And it's said, according to the story, that every year thereafter they kiss the head of the bull as part of a ritual. Now, this is a really, really interesting statement. And I could go on for hours just on that, but the bull represents the earth itself. Even to this day, Anatolians believe that the earth is the bull. And when the bull moves, you have thunderstorms, you have earthquakes, you have volcanoes. But anyway, so this is what they do. Haram is, really close, as we've already mentioned, to Shanlurfa. So who or what is the serpent? Well, firstly, if it did have legs, it suggests that it was some kind of snake shaman, in my opinion. And we know that the snake was the key symbol of the shamans, particularly at Karahan Tepe, and obviously the snake imagery. In my opinion, that snake is the cosmic serpent, and it's the voice coming from the shamans at that site. In other words, it's knowledge and wisdom that's being given to them from a cosmic source that they interpret in the form of a snake or serpent, and it's being given to them to help accelerate the evolution and development and innovation of the Tash Tepeler movement. And I believe that's exactly what was happening. And I think that, as I said, that it's very similar to what you have in Greece with the Delphic Oracle, where people relied on that oracle so much. And obviously it wasn't the only oracle, there were several others that are lesser known. And that this is what was going on. In other words, the Serpent of Eden is the cosmic serpent itself. And
Yeah.
if we now turn to Gnosticism, and particularly the Orphite tradition, Orphite simply comes from the Greek word orphis, which means snake.
Mhm.
We know that the Gnostics used snakes in their rituals, and the idea was to achieve gnosis or oneness with the divine. And this they would do by connecting with a cosmic serpent. It was known as the Good Serpent. And this was the son of the Father, God
Mm.
Himself, who was this supernal being, like a sun, like an invisible sun existing beyond the physical universe. And the Son, S-O-N, would intercede on behalf of the Father, and it would be this that the Gnostics would strive to become at one with and allow it to possess them, exactly the same as what we're talking about in connection with Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. And this is what these rituals were. This is why, they were seen as heretical by the early church. This is why they wanted to stamp out the Gnostics, because not only were they claiming that they had a direct link with God himself, via his son, but in addition to this, they were using snakes in their rituals, quite literally.
Yeah.
I mean, I go into big detail about this, that this snake that they were, the snake genius that they were connecting with, was quite clearly another reference to the cosmic serpent. I mean, by now, obviously, we're talking about the beginnings of Christianity, late antiquity, Roman times, where things have changed, and their connection between the serpent and the galactic bulge and the Milky Way had almost disappeared by this time. And in fact, they actually said that there were two serpents. One was the good serpent that in the sky was connected with the constellation of Draco, that the cosmic serpent that turns around the celestial pole, or certainly did during the time of the pyramids. But they actually refer to another serpent called the bad serpent or the evil serpent that they connected directly with galactic center. So it's almost like at some point somebody had come along and updated these beliefs in the cosmic serpent and reconnected it with another area of sky. And I know when this happened, it was when Thuban, one of the stars of Draco, actually became the pole star. And that occurred around 3000 BC. So all attention started focusing on that area of the sky, and less attention was being focused on the area of the galactic bulge. So this single snake, cosmic snake, started to basically separate into two, the good serpent and the bad serpent. But some of the Gnostics still saw the area of the bad serpent as the true place of the Son of God. Basically, I bring all this out in the book, but a lot of them switched their interests into the area of the constellation of Draco, the celestial dragon or serpent.
I mean, it's interesting that was happening as a movement. I'm glad you brought up the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit interpretation as to what it
Yeah,
potentially originally was, seen
yeah,
as, I mentioned my teacher's tradition. And 2 years ago, I was in Nepal with him, and I did actually have an experience emerging with the Nagas. It's not a possession as we sort of see in Hollywood films. It's more of an inspiriting that takes place.
yeah.
And so
Oh,
the inspiriting, I had an inspirited experience with the Naga of a particular part of Nepal where we were way up in the mountains, and many hours away from Kathmandu. And we were with some mountain shamans who didn't speak any English. And I sort of described it to some friends as like if you've watched Star Wars, as sort of like a force test, for lack of a better description, because I had to put my hand in a copper pot in a kalasa that had been prepared in a very sacred way, ritual way, and and I already have a relationship with the Nagas, with Naga Kanya, and I already in his tradition for several years have already been working with the Nagas. So that's why part of this ritual was for this. And I placed my hand inside the kalasa, and almost immediately firstly, the air temperature was incredibly hot. We're in a room, there's no windows are open, the doors are closed. It's being smoked out like nothing else. There's a fire going inside the room. There's poles with all kinds of plants, native plants that have been brought in from outside and wrapped around different poles, support structures in the room. And so it's really hot. I'm already sweating, and this pot had become, I could see there was condensation around it. It was ice cold. There was no water, and there was no ice inside of it. So I placed my hand inside, and the water was ice cold, and I immediately felt this sort of like a shiver, but it went up my arm, and there were the main shaman and an assistant shaman, just to make sure that while the ritual is taking place, you don't completely get taken over, and that it potentially can become a possession. And so I could feel the merging partially up my upper body, and then the assistant shaman did a little thing around my arm, and then wrapped these leaves around it, and then they sprinkled me with some water, and it took about, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes, it felt like, and then they pulled, the serpent back out. When I came back out of that, and I was completely aware and conscious the whole time, so I was present in my body, I was aware of what was happening. I was able to then, I was aware of every single of the other Westerners that were in the room. There were some Westerners and a bunch of other shamans, and I was aware of literally every single person, Westerner in the room's life story. Like, it was too much information. I didn't need to know. I was just, and it went like this, zoom, 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 zoom. Like, I knew if I just looked at them, I was like, wow, got this download about that person. Then the next, and then I just sat back against this wall and had to just let it all just settle and permeate. And then after that, I felt totally connected in a much more deeper and profound way to all that is, to the particular land where we were, the activations we were doing. And then we were spending another couple of weeks deeper in the mountains doing other work in caves and so on. And I was really like one with that land, one with what was going on there. And so, as you've been describing and talking about all your research, and even when I was reading your book, I could totally understand this idea of the shamans, the communication, the ancient wisdom, and also the fact that we've been so conditioned to believe another story that's keeping us from understanding our ancient roots, our ancient wisdom, our truth, right? Where we really come from and what happened. So it's no surprise that there's this, at a certain point in history, there was a shift in the story to, dare I say, control the people, right? Like, sort of have this other storyline that's going on and playing out, and demonize the serpent and create all these negative stories around snakes and dragons even. So I just wanted to share that experience with you.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, obviously you're in, sort of the area which you have Vedic traditions associated with yoga and also Tantra,
Yeah,
etc.
tantra for sure.
And of course, the main focus here is obviously the chakra system.
Hmm.
And what's so interesting is that in both Gnostic and in Vedic tradition, the seat of power obviously is in the area of the base chakra, and it then rises up
Hmm.
into the body in the form of a snake. These
Hmm.
ideas are there, as I say, in the West and also in Vedic tradition. And that area of the body around the genitalia, which was known in Latin as the cathedra, which means the arch, uh,
Interesting.
is associated with the stars of Scorpius. It's there in Vedic tradition. I bring this out in the book. It's
Yeah.
there in Western tradition. It was there in Babylonian tradition. There's a concept, for instance, known as zodiac man. I mean, it's various terms, where the body is allotted one of the 12 signs of the zodiac. And always Scorpius is in the area of the genitalia. And the reason for this is, I think that it's a case of as above, so below, that people, when they made their link with the cosmic serpent and the head of the cosmic serpent, its point of knowledge and wisdom, but also its source of power, remember,
Hmm.
that it's linked through that to that part of the body and then rising up through the body in a manner which in Vedic tradition is called the rising of the Kundalini.
Yes.
And the Kundalini is like the internal snake that then rises up inside of you. This is a memory, I think, of these possessions
Yeah.
of the snake. People that have ayahuasca experiences
Yes.
very often encounter snakes.
Hmm.
Now, the snakes are all over the place. They're crawling around doors and walls and trees and whatever. However, what I've heard consistently is that people will see a single snake that will approach them and it will want to enter inside them. And of course, people that are unfamiliar with this type of connection, become fearful at this point and will back away and not take part. But afterwards they realized that no, something amazing was about to take place. by allowing this snake to enter inside them. And I think that this is exactly what we are talking about here, from the shamanistic point of view through to the rising of the Kundalini in Vedic tradition, through to what the Gnostics were doing in allowing, the sun, the snake, which was, the representation of the true divine, to enter inside you. And that this seat of power idea is something that we see in the statues at Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, and a new site that's been uncovered recently called Cyberge, where you have these males holding their genitalia. And people look at this and they say, oh, it's about sex and it's, just showing off and it's sexual practice. No, 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 it's nothing to do with that at all. It's saying, I have the power. And that power is about control over your environment, control over animals, which remember would be wanting to eat them half the time, control over, rival groups or whatever. It's a supernatural ability which we've lost today for the most part. There are certain people in places like, the Philippines that still have this power. And they all say that the power rises from the area which in Vedic tradition is known as the base chakra. And that this is what they are doing. They're saying, I have the power. And this is, even the Easter Island statues, the Moai, also have their hands coming round to the same spot. Sulawesi in Indonesia, you have statues that have their hands coming around to the same spot. This is what is going on here. It's nothing specifically to do with fertility, although it has a relationship to fertility and obviously to sex. Because
I just want to add to that point on the genitals and the sexual organs, because in Tantra, in the Kashmir Shaivism practice, there's a saying that within our breath, within our prana, resides the memory of who we are. And when you do these activations, these pranic activations, these tantric pranic activations of awakening the lower chakras and the kundalini, the shakti, then this power arises through, and you then have the connection that comes up through the nadis, the central channel, and then of course out of your upper chakra and connecting you to the higher chakras out of the body to cosmic consciousness, essentially, right? And then you are one, you are with everything, is such the practice of animism in many of these ancient indigenous cultures, shamanic traditions, right? So it's for sure there's a massive connection there. That would have been an amazing power center, Karahan Tepe, back then, to just witness what was going on, to have the experience. What does it feel like to stand there? Is that it, like, energetically, can you feel a reverberation from what's been unearthed and as you were there?
Yeah, everybody can. Anybody that goes to both Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe will come away saying, Karahan Tepe is a place that I connect with. There's something profound that has clearly gone on there. I think people, when they go to Göbekli Tepe, partly because obviously it's got a roof on it and it's so commercial there now, they feel it's very sterile, in all honesty, that it doesn't speak to them in the same way as Karahan Tepe. That's the place to go now. They welcome visitors. You don't pay anything to go there, and you're allowed to go up to the site, see the latest excavations. Whereas obviously at Göbekli, there's a massive visitor centre, which is great, by the way, it's brilliant. Whereas if you go to Karahan, it's completely different. And as I said, there's this new site that they're opening up, huge area called Cyberge, which is only a few miles to the west of Şanlıurfa. And, under certain circumstances, you can go there. And these are just three of what are officially 12 Taş Tepe sites in that region, all within the province of Şanlıurfa. But the estimates suggest that there could be 30 to 40. Lee Clare, the lead archaeologist at Göbekli Tepe, suggests there could even be 100 of these sites around. Whether they'll all be like Göbekli and Karahan, we don't know. But, what we've covered here is some of the main themes of that book.
And so why is it important for people to understand this part, like civilization from this? You and I know why, but like, what do you say to people when they go, why should I read your book? Or why do I need to know this stuff?
Well, because this is who we are. This is our origins. This is where we came from. This is where our cosmologies, our religions, our beliefs and practices came from originally. This was the point of transition from us, doing rituals in caves during the Paleolithic period to the first organized, religious traditions. And we have to go back to understand who we are now and how we can advance and go forward, with these type of spiritual practices. And as I said, what's going on within, let's say, yoga, within, tantra, within Gnosticism, all have their roots in Karahan Tepe, in my opinion. They come via Haran, which was the ancient city of the Chaldeans or Sabians, where astrology begins, where astronomy begins, some of the other sciences, algebra, the first astrolobes were created there. This is where a lot of the sciences really began as well. And all of them, I think, come from this inspiration of us connecting with the cosmic serpent that took place at places like Karahan Tepe as much as 11,000 years ago. I could go on all day about hearing from my books, to be honest. How long have you
I
got?
know.
No, I mean, look, if people are interested in what I'm doing or what we've talked about here, I mean, clearly I'd recommend, the Karahan Tepe book, which you can get from all good online bookstores, including Amazon and Barnes and Noble. My website is andrewcollins.com. There's articles on all of these topics there, or certainly links to them. And we do tours to Turkey. When I say we, as myself, Hugh Newman and JJ Ainsworth, we go to Turkey twice a year as part of the Megalithomania tours. Links for those on my website now. And yeah, that's it really. I mean, it's such an exciting time because, we're uncovering more about our ancestors in the last 20 years than I think we probably did in the last 100 or 200 years. And it's extraordinary. But what it's also showing is that a lot of indigenous cultures around the world are still practicing today what was going on at the likes of Karahan Tepe 11,000 years ago, and that the symbolism is there for all to see. And I think that that's just so incredible, and that a lot of these ideas did come from the Tash Tapala movement.
Well, thank you so much for this. It's been awesome to chat to you, and I really loved reading your book. And I'm going to get a few more of your books because you've got so much great information out there. So thank you so much for today. Really enjoyed it, Andrew.
I appreciate that, and we'll speak again.